let's just let it rip and see where it goes. But I'm Zach Tompkinson, and this is the No Name Robot Podcast. Still have no name for it. So
I'm Chris Savoya. Thanks for joining us.
And this is Brian F. Dillman. Still don't know what the F stands for.
Thanks for joining us, Brian.
I've never made any qualms about that. I'm proud of that name. Don't you go taking it away from me. Named after my mother's father.
Oh yeah.
How's that for a little tidbit?
And is it Francis or whoa? I don't like that. I gotta do that off.
Yeah.
Looks like I'm bathing in the sun here. I don't know. Well, welcome, Dillman. It's been a long time since I've seen you. I think it's been now, 6 months?
Thanks for having me, boys.
Yeah, happy to have you on.
Hasn't been that bad. He's making up stories, Savoya, because he doesn't want you to know that he saw me and played golf with me like 3 months ago.
I follow him close enough to know that Zach's been playing golf with you the whole time. So
no. It's I'm not shy about it at all.
It's been a little while though.
Let's not talk about what my game is. Yeah. How has the winter been for you there, big man?
Well, aside from that, we got 22 inches of snow the other day, and my snowblower was like, "You must be joking." It was not fun on Thursday of last week when the storm came through, and I fancy myself as a snow guy that, the Dillman family tradition of cleaning up the driveway and making sure everything looks good. This was the biggest battle I've ever had in my adult life. I literally had to give up at one point because I was like, there's no way I'm not going to make it.
My heart,
and your heart almost gave out on you.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be face down in a snowbank.
All right, so let's jump into it with some good pertinent robot talk here. Dillman, I want to hear about your first job, and I think I know where it is, but I want you to tell everybody, and
your first
in the robot industry.
Give us your background, because your story is weird and fun, and it's definitely, you didn't get right into robots. So talk about, I guess, how you got into robots.
Yeah.
All right, so let's start at the Steve Martin very beginning of how I ended up in sales is the first question.
Good question.
I unsuccessfully pursued a career in criminal justice. I was actually going to try and be part of the New York State Bureau of Criminal Investigation as part of New York State Police.
Oh.
But unfortunately, I did not score high enough in my state trooper exam when Mario Cuomo was governor to make it into the program. There's an interesting tidbit. I was actually contacted by New York State Police Association. They wanted to sue the governor, and it was me and another gentleman that both had grades that normally would have been us in, but we didn't. So like a lot of people, I migrated into my first job in sales was actually selling photocopiers, and that was brutal, but that was a great life experience.
What company? Like Rico or
what? Actually Rico Comdoc. So the local distributor for Rico photocopiers, and a good buddy of mine was the guy that hired me, guy I played football with in college. And that didn't last. I don't even think it was a year. And I got approached to join a company called Testomatic, and Testomatic made high-end open and short testers for printed circuit boards. And that was my first introduction into technology. Mm-hmm. So as you guys probably know, a lot of people find interesting is that when I start talking about my 34 years in sales and 30 in the robotics industry, most people automatically think I'm an engineer. And I'm like, nope, sociology and criminal justice, baby. That's what my degrees are in.
College football star.
But I just happened to get into selling electronic test. Yeah. Selling electronic test equipment got me introduced to a company called Applied Robotics in Schenectady, New York. And back in the day when you guys were still in junior high and I was working, Applied Robotics was the leading tool changer company in North. ATI Industrial, they didn't even exist yet. They were 4 guys in a garage.
Wow.
and it was RoboHand and Applied Robotics.
Wow.
And I was fortunate enough to get tapped to be their automotive accounts manager, and had 5 years with them and was very successful with them, and was recruited by Motoman. And that's what got me into the actual selling robots.
Very
So
interesting.
5 years of selling collision detectors and tool changers.
Cool.
And
Yeah,
then
I actually, we're working
that
with
launched
Applied
me
Robotics
into
right
the
now.
robot side of the business.
That's cool. It's come full circle. I'm working with them now for some UR Plus projects. So
Be careful.
we will. That sounds good.
Applied Robotics is they've kind of had an interesting trajectory. Let's say that.
Mhm. Okay, cool. That's all we
then
need
what?
to
So the
say.
background. Yeah, I mean, so the background is basically after 5 years at Applied Robotics, I spent 7 years at Motoman, and then worked for some integration companies, spent 8 years at KUKA, then spent 3 years at Universal Robots, and now I am the Vice President of National Sales for Automated Motion out of Belcamp, Maryland.
Favorite former company?
I puzzled over that one because there's a lot of aspects of all of the companies. So for example, Motoman, under Phil of Motoman, which was a joint venture between Hobart Brothers Welding Equipment and Yaskawa. Respectfully, I'll say this, that not a lot of stories can get shared about the Motoman days, because the description of the Motoman days, I was 29 when I went to work for Motoman. I was the youngest sales guy on their team. And we had, I think, over 20 salespeople in the team. And it was like a frat house, literally. The camaraderie was great. It was really fun. Growth was exciting. At the time, we thought it was, 50%, 40% growth a year. Motoman, we thought we were rock stars. So it wasn't until the advent of, you guys and we did at UR with the tremendous growth as part of that team has just been unheard of. So I can honestly say there's aspects of the robot companies I worked for were great fun. I think the most enjoyment I got was managing the East Coast team at UR, because I finally found the most comfortable place for me, which is managing people and being on a team. Part of my background in athletics, I think, leads to that.
Yep.
Being accustomed to
As a
being on a
leader.
team and enjoying that. And I think with the exception of Mr. Tompkinson calling me 8 times a day and wearing me out, that was some of the most enjoyment I've had, working for UR and being part of UR's growth and success. Reflect back on that very fondly.
Great.
Absolutely. Well, we certainly loved having you here. I learned a great deal of what I know today from you, and following in your footsteps as best as possible, while also avoiding some of your catastrophic flaws. I'm just kidding.
I thought Zach was going to
I
say,
couldn't give you a full
I took all the
compliment.
stuff you did and said, don't do any of that.
Let's keep it nice and civil
what
here,
not
boys.
to do, my man. Absolutely.
Yeah. So Dillman, I understand that. I mean, you've taken all that time in sales. You realize you were a good sales guy, but a really good sales manager, basically at Universal Robots,
Thank you,
I think.
Chris. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And that's what you do now. So you're now VP of sales. I know you have a smaller team there. I think you guys are, maybe also looking to have other people on your sales team in the future, but you now are still a sales manager today, and you do still find enjoyment in that.
Absolutely. I mean, we were fortunate enough to find a resource. We hired a regional sales manager for the Mid-Atlantic down into the East Coast, Southeast. So that's great. I'm doing still direct selling as part of my role. So it's a hybridized role right now, but it's part of being in a smaller company as well.
Yeah. And so can you talk, can you go a little bit into automated motion and, what the focus of automated motion is and that business strategy and
Absolutely.
what your goals are? Yeah.
Sure. Automated Motion is a 26-year-old company that focuses on the consumer products market and is exclusively in the material handling side of the business. So, having sold welding equipment in my past, that's not part of what we do at Automated Motion. A big reason why I'm at Automated Motion is because when I was at KUKA, I was Automated Motion's account manager, and then I worked with them as the integrator manager at KUKA to help them grow their business. We were very successful together. So I have a great deal of affection and affinity for how Automated Motion goes to market. We really promote three things. We promote custom, multi-axis, high-speed servo. So we have customers out there that we're building machines for them, custom servo machines that are building, for example, we have a cup maker that 250 cups per minute are made on it's 12 and a half, almost 13 axes of motion. I always say 13, it's easier for me to remember. But the highest speed machines that we make handle upwards of 3,000 pieces of candy a minute. In a
This is single line or multiple lines going through there?
Sorry, Chris?
Are they handling, like, are they essentially doing everything serially, or are they parallelized, such that like multiple pieces or parts are going through at the same time?
No, a singular machine.
Wow.
So you have a Getz Candy, to delve a little deeper into it. Getz Candy starts out making their cowtails and their candies on a rope. And then they size the rope down to portion size, and then we cut it and then pack it into what you see in stores at 3,000 pieces a minute.
Very good.
So that gives us the ability to talk to customers about high-speed automation. We also do area gantries where appropriate. And then we've really, probably in the last 15 to 18 years, have gotten very much into the industrial and collaborative pedestal style robots.
Yep.
So most of our business today, or more of our business today, is on the robotics side than it is on the gantry and the servo side. But the beauty of it is, and this was applicable when I was at KUKA, I would introduce Automated Motion to customers with a simple premise that said, look, these guys are going to solve your problem. And how they do it, if they use my robot, great. If they don't, as long as they solve your problem. And I think you guys have both heard say this before, but a big part of my philosophy towards selling is be an asset to your customer, whether you make a sale or not. I want to be the resource that the customer says, let me call Dillman, he'll help me out. And the irony is that I'm still getting calls from you, our customers, saying, I know you don't work for them anymore, but, and same things. I got a call from a KUKA customer the other day, and I'm like, look, I haven't worked for KUKA in 12 years. What do you want from me?
Yeah.
It's not really that long, but.
Yeah, what, 7 years probably, right? Or 6.
So yeah, Automated Motion is a great little company out of Maryland. We're a national company, and we do palletizing, we do case packing, and we do material handling, pick and place, and other types of material handling applications. That's our niche.
And engineering sound, I mean, and from what I've seen and working together with them on some universal robot projects, some of the best, most, skilled robot engineers and really automation engineers that I've seen too. So I think that it's a great company with a core competency that is, even more technically savvy than I'd say a lot of integrators, which is awesome. So
Dillman, why do you think we saw this shift?
I think
you said 15 or 18 years ago, there was a shift, to be more towards pedestal style 6-axis robots. Why do you think you saw that shift at your company that long ago? And is it a maturation of the technology, or did the profile or the wants of the customer change over time? What was it?
I think the two biggest driving factors, Chris, are the technology from the pedestal robot side has become so much more reliable and robust. And if you think about, here's my old man stories. When I joined Motoman, the biggest robot you could buy from Motoman was 120 kilos. That was the big boy.
Wow.
1994. Well, 120 kilogram robot today is, not even mid-range. When you start looking at, the big monster 1,300, 2,000 kilogram payload robots that are on the market. Yeah. And then the other thing is that the cost factor, that 120 kilogram robot in 1994 cost $86,000. Nobody's paying that kind of money for those robots like that anymore. It's the prices have come down, the reliability has gone up, the durability has increased. So it is easier for a company building solutions, Automated Motion included, to avail ourselves of the technology that's out there on the market rather than try and build something. So selling robots to integrators was a big part of my career. And I can't tell you how many times people have said, you know, now that the price of the robots have come down and smaller robots are so affordable, we, quotation marks, integrator would say, it's not worth it to me to go out and build a custom multi-axis machine. Anything beyond 2 axes, it's easier for me to just buy a robot.
Yep.
Cheaper, faster, easier.
Yep.
Very good.
You know, talking about that and you know, obviously there was a disruptive shift here even in the last, say, 5 years with, you know, the emergence of collaborative robots, and sort of how the market is shifting there. Where do you see the either the next shift, whether that's technology driven or, you know, how the market changes? What's like some of your focuses or inspiration and or something that you find the most intriguing as technology shifts? You know, it can be a few things. It doesn't have to be specific to like 6-axis robots. It can be another technology, you know, but specifically within automation, what is a, you know, whether a trend in the market that you're seeing or a new technology that you find very intriguing that you think is going to change, you know, the next decade?
All right, let's start with the premise that robotics begins to leave the industrial realm and starts moving out into commercial, retail, those kind of economies. So the e-commerce market is a great evidence of, you know, the migration into different areas. You know, at one of the trade shows that Universal Robots was at, I had the opportunity to be on a panel, and I think it was, can't remember what year it was, probably let's say 17. It was a show at Javits, and somebody asked about, you know, what's the next evolution of collaborative robots? And the answer is mobile. How can it not be mobile?
Sure.
The biggest limiting factor to industrial robot 83 phase, and a robot weighs 1,000 pounds. So how the hell you move that thing around?
Sure.
Well, now that you've got technologies out there where, you know, the mass of the robot compared to its payload is fairly insignificant, the idea of running a robot on a battery driven AMR or AGV or similar, I believed that 3 years ago, and I believe that today. And we have discussions internally, as I have discussions with other people in the industry, that, you know, I have a little bit of a bugaboo. One is that, you know, no disrespect to the companies that make the AMRs, but it's not a robot. And I hate to say that. I mean,
they may beg to differ, but I think that is it's definitely
it's a matter of
different.
Explain your rationale, Dillman. Why do you say that?
What is the definition of a robot? It is a multi-axis mechanical device that can execute a job. Well, these AMRs, and I'm not naming names, but all of these AMRs that are out there, I can drive it to a position, and then what? Something else has got to take over.
Well, I think it's the aspect of the human. There is a human interaction at that point in that step, right? They're not always, but correct. More likely than not, I would say in the market that is a challenge, and so I see that as a huge trend going forward. Is those technologies really having to merge together? You know, the AMR and the 6-axis robots, and you know, there's probably different terms under the AMR and there's different terms under the 6-axis, but genuinely speaking, I mean, putting a mobile robot with an articulating arm allows it to be more commercialized and be put in places that it cannot be today. And when you look at the change of 6-axis robots going from, you know, like their strength to weight ratio is coming down. So they weigh, you know, they can carry, you know, almost, you know, in some cases 50% of what they weigh.
Mass to payload. Absolutely. Yep. I agree, Zach.
Yep.
Just so you guys know, that the official term for that is mobile manipulator. Like not, and I say official, that's kind of like what the standards committees are throwing around and stuff like that.
Sure.
Mobile manipulator. Yeah.
That's the combination of the two.
And again, yeah, I mean, if you want to ask me what my, you know, crazy vision in the back of my head is, I see robots stocking shelves in the supermarket at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
I see, robots working in retail in malls, if we ever get back to them. I think you're going to see a lot more kiosk-based businesses where, everything is done with I got a debit card and I got an online order and I just show up and the robot processes everything and I just go pick it up in a drop shoot. So part of what we're dealing with as an industry is lack of available workforce and skills gap. It's amazing to me, fellas, that was never discussed in the early parts of my career. As a matter of fact, most people were like, don't you feel bad you're putting people out of work? When the reality is that, there's enough evidence out there that if you just look for it, automation and employment actually run together in a positive arc, not the opposite.
I think it was like the RIA numbers and I know like Jeff Bernstein talks about it a lot, and even like McKinsey Corp has come out and talked about kind of the difference in what's in the skill, the labor gap and the skills gap, and that it also creates a surplus. Like the more you automate, the more jobs that there tend to be, and I look at what's going to happen, and I think what I've seen recently is a change from a customer perspective, because there were some customers that really got it before and they fully bought in on it. But I think even since COVID, I've been fielding a lot more phone calls, a lot more conversations that are, okay, now we're looking at things differently than we did in 2019, because coronavirus has changed our mindset on what automation needs to look like for us for the next 10 years. So they might have had it planned in the future, but now they're looking at like a pandemic has changed and shifted their mindset on the need for automation more so than I've seen from any other factor in the past, 5 years of working in the industry.
I totally agree. I think it's accelerated people's timetables and schedules. And I think when we talk about safety, historically we talk about safety as to man-machine interface and, how can we operate safely around people? But now part of the discussion on safety is how do we keep people protected and safe and social distanced? And, this has changed the game for robotics and automation in a positive way. 2020 was bizarre, but commercially was a very good year for automated motion. So we're very optimistic about going forward.
Good stuff. Yeah, you're right. There has been a tremendous amount of historical emphasis on the human to machine interface, right? HMI. That term has been around forever. And I think you're right, Dillman. More so now, they're also considering safety of workers, between humans, really human to human contact, as well as human to machine contact. It's interesting. Good take. I like it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You look at some of the mobile robots that are out there, and that market and what that growth looks like, and you combine that with what some of the collaborative robot projections are over the next 5 to 10 years, and it's really interesting. I think a lot of times those terms kind of get swapped in because I think some people categorize collaborative robots as like the mobile robots as well. It kind of inside that number. But one thing is for sure that you have to get into the commercial space truly, I think, to recognize the full projections that you see out there, which is where I think the market is heading as well. So I think it's a really interesting point to bring up. Now, shifting gears for a minute here, and I'd love to get your opinion more on what you see in the future. If there are other technologies that you think are critical and that are kind of or going to change the way we do business in the next 10 years as automation and robot companies. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up on that topic before I switch to another question?
Yeah, I think that when you start combining vision and AI and AMRs and other technologies that increase the ease of use of robots and then allows for, like, one of the more exciting things that we've seen recently and we're actively working on projects on are, eliminating traditional conveyance of product, especially once it's on a pallet, and replacing that with the AMRs. And now you've got an open work envelope and using, the different routing techniques and planning, you're no longer, creating this octopus of conveyors that will tie you up and landlock you for the future. You've got all this other space.
It's a
which
flexible
adds all
work
kinds of
floor.
flexibility.
It's a flexible work floor at that
Exactly.
point. And I think what you see is,
Yep.
From what I see is when you go down and you look at, you said vision and AI and AMRs and 6-axis robots, ultimately it's making robots to be more human-like. I mean, I know that that's probably a little scary to think about, but vision is giving it eyes, AI is giving it a brain, AMR is basically giving it feet,
Right.
and a 6-axis robot is giving it an arm. And so it's making these, and combining those technologies together really makes robots more human-like. And then I think of the other end of it, this is really the industrial way that is being done now. But I think of the way that companies like Boston Dynamics have done things they've kind of taken it the opposite approach. They're looking at the commercial and how do we build this all into a single robot and then have it, kind of maybe pushed either into the commercial, potentially into the industrial industry. Obviously, you see them like picking up packages and moving them. But it's interesting to see that approach. And what is your thoughts on coming at it from the industrial way, where we're all from, versus coming at it more from I call it commercial. I don't know how exactly, but I don't know if I'm framing it properly, but looking at it the way like Boston Dynamics is coming from maybe the top end back in from a full solution of making a robot like a human.
Yeah, I mean, Boston Dynamics and some of the things they're doing and some of the other companies that are in that same realm have done some remarkable things with, motion, not like we've seen
Dynamics,
before, like,
really.
the Jaguar
Yeah.
or whatever the heck they call that. I mean, it's
Yeah.
crazy to see what they're doing, but that lends me, I mean, my optimism being, the old guy is, I'd like to still see in my lifetime where, you've got this Jetsons like robotic solution out there in
You
the
want
world.
a butler.
But not even the butler. I mean, that was what, Zach, that was a joke. Every time you went to a trade show, some knucklehead said, well, can you sell me one to vacuum my rug?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Or
Roomba.
something more profane and disgusting than that, but something like that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's that too. But the reality is, and to me, the threshold that has to be handled is the safety aspect. And I still think that we as an industry, there's a TS and different standards out there, but it was not the easiest thing to arrive at. Let's put it that way.
Sure.
So I think that the next evolution is truly safe, which is dangerous to even talk about. But, the risk assessment and moving into a safer technology of a robot that can identify through vision or some other scanning technology and can differentiate between, is that a fork truck coming at me or is that Chris Savoya walking up the aisle?
Yeah.
Right. I have to behave differently if it's a human truck and what's the safety aspects of that. But that next stair step of going beyond where we are today will open up the semi-industrial, commercial, retail, all those other different businesses. I laugh all the time when I read the stories about the robot butlers and, what's the biggest problem that they have in the hotel industry of having robot butlers delivering your room service. It's because some drunk guy decides he's going to knock it over as he's walking down the hallway.
Yeah.
They hadn't planned for that. How do we account for the knuckleheads in the world?
Yeah.
Well, you
Well,
can't.
yeah, and you've seen that, you've even seen that now on the floor where that can happen, with a 6-axis arm and people not, are intentionally, trying to mess up what's going on. So let me ask you this. Do you see companies like Fanuc and Universal Robots from the industrial side and there are obviously many others that have 6-axis arms and, combined with other technologies that we talked about before, like vision AI and automated mobile robots. Do you see those technologies combining at some point and ultimately competing with companies like Boston Dynamics and the products that they've come out with? Or do you think that's too far-fetched? Let's say, 10 years from now, do those companies have more in common than they do today? And the technologies are going to ultimately kind of meet a converging center, or is that too far-fetched?
Well, I mean, let's address it this way. If you look at the industrial robotics when Universal and who's the Baxter?
Rethink.
Rethink. Yeah. So when those two companies started to emerge onto the market more significantly, the back channel conversations at Fanuc, Motoman, ABB, KUKA, and the others was, this is a fad.
Yeah.
This isn't really going to take over the market. And there's people in those companies that are admitting the fact that they were hoping that collaborative robots wouldn't take off.
Yeah.
But I think that there's an exponential from migrating from industrial to collaborative to getting into the more exotic things like Boston Dynamics products. But I also think that there is, when you've got these think tanks that are operating as part of Carnegie Mellon and other, robotic based educational entities, there's a 19-year-old kid out there right now coming up with some crazy idea for the next evolution.
Yep.
We just don't know what it's going to be yet. But my answer to you, Zach, directly is, I don't believe you're ever going to see, Fanuc, KUKA, ABB, Motoman, Nachi, Kawasaki, and those guys migrate away from what they do today because so much demand and need for those technologies that to leave that to go elsewhere. For example, someone who was chief financial officer of one of the companies I worked for literally quoted as saying, "Oh, the collaborative market will never be more than 5,000 to 7,000 robots a year worldwide." Think about that. How far off the mark is this person who worked for one of the biggest robot companies in the world, didn't have an appreciation for what the next evolution in the market was going to be? I believe that collaborative is going to get to be 25, 30% of the overall robot consumption. No, I don't believe that. I believe that there's a place for collaboratives and it fits. Will there be a place for a new technology? All depends on what it is. And I am not smart enough, nor am I entrepreneurial enough, because if I was, I wouldn't be working for somebody else.
Yeah.
I'd be creating these technologies, and it's just
and
not.
you're still talking within the industrial or kind of like the envisioned applications for robots at this point in time. You're still talking within industrial, whether it's manufacturing or commerce, kind of the stuff that has been evaluated already for robots. That's what you're talking about, the tangible market here, correct? Not the untapped potential future markets.
Grocery stores.
Who knows?
Pharmacies.
Yeah, those kind of places.
Whatever, yeah.
Yeah, who knows?
Cool. All right, I want to switch gears for a minute. I want to ask you who you think who's the best salesperson you've ever met? I know a lot of people on LinkedIn have,
That's easy. That's easy.
Who is it? Can you give a little background on it?
I'll tell you the whole story, man. It's my pleasure. And it actually was a little bit upsetting because this gentleman passed away within the last year.
Oh,
and
sorry to hear that.
Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get to his funeral. Well, he lived a good full life. He was close to or beyond 80 when he passed. But the gentleman is a guy by the name of Mark Dumbald. And Mark was the best I have ever seen. Worked for Motoman. He was their guy in part of Ohio. He didn't even have the whole state. And his biggest year was over $20 million in revenue. And here's why Mark Dumbald is the best I've ever seen. Besides the fact that he was the consummate sales professional and was incredibly good at what he did, we were at the last day of a trade show together, and it was 3:30 in the afternoon, and we were all laying on the carpet waiting to go home. And two young guys walked into the Motoman booth, and Mark went over and started talking to him. And he spent an hour with these two guys. And when they walked away, we were like, "Who are those guys?" And he was like, "They're two juniors from Ohio State." And everybody was like, "Mark, you got to be kidding me. You spent an hour?" And he goes, "Hey, those guys are going to graduate next year. And guess whose robots they're going to use?" And that was just, that encapsulates the mindset of Mark Dumbald. He was a gentleman. He was a great salesman. And he was the guy that, man, that's the guy you were gunning for. You were like, I got to catch Dumbald. And
He
unfortunately,
put in the
20 million
time,
that
and he had
year.
the forward thinking of what could really happen in the future, and he wasn't afraid to spend the time on aspects that, you know, might not pay him dividends, you know, within that next year or couple years, but really thinking about long term, and, you know, the fact of giving
Yeah, I
can
know you
also,
guys aren't familiar with this term, but there was a term that we used to use before you guys started in the industry. It's called deferred gratification. You
Fair
work,
enough.
you
I like
work
it.
for the future, not just for what you're going to get tomorrow.
Yes, that's true.
all right.
So yeah,
let's,
there's a few other guys out there that I tip my hat to, and but Dumbald, he was the man.
I'm bald.
very
I'll have a
cool.
toast to him.
Pour one out for him. Apologies to his family. That's sorry to hear that. But seems like a very good guy.
Cool.
So let's talk about your craziest sales experience. I told you that it had to be PG related, which I'm sure makes it a lot more difficult for you. So
It was really hard. I settled on an idea. There was a circumstance that has stayed with me throughout my career that just was absolutely crazy. And Zach, you know the company because they're in New Hampshire. When I was at Motoman, I sold a arc welding, stud welding combined system to a customer in New Hampshire. Their manufacturing engineering manager was a nice guy, but he was very difficult. He was your typical New England, I'm going to drag you over the coals. He came out for runoff, and basically what we were doing is we were forming the shell of a product, and then we were putting T-studs on that product for additional manufacturing mounting of other products. So we sat down, and the project engineer that was working with me said, all right, I'm going to, start up the arc welding, and then we're going to do the stud welding. We did the arc welding. The guy's like, yeah, the arc welding is no big deal. I want to see this thing stud weld. And it was a TRW Nelson stud welder. And as we were starting, it was like 6 or 8 studs in a row. And this gentleman's name was David. And David says to me, how accurately can we place the studs? And I'm like, great question. Don't know. And I turned to the guy from TRW and said, hey, what's your accuracy? And he goes, and he starts, doing the typical when you're a tech guy and you don't have an answer.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the Motoman guy goes, whoops. I go, whoops, what? And he goes, I think I messed up. And we went over, and he put a stud on top of a stud. So he repeated the placement of that stud welder in the spot where he just placed one, and he did a Robin Hood. He laid a stud right on top of the other one. And the customer looked at me 18 minutes into the runoff that we expected to go for like a day and a half. And he's like, I'm like, seriously? He goes, yeah, print the papers out. I'll sign it. Let's go.
18-minute.
So that's my G-rated best story.
Love it.
I got other ones, but I can't share them.
He totally made the mistake, and yet it made it like, well, that proved to us, how accurate this thing is. So done.
Dillman, did you sell that through an integrator, or was Motoman working on that kind of like with an in-house team? How was that sold to the customer?
Motoman had their advanced systems group, and they would do, and still to this day, Motoman does some turnkey solutions for customers, not as many as they used to. But back in the 90s, we would sell arc welding as a turnkey solution through the ASG group. But here's the funny, follow up to that story, and it's very timely because it happened right around this time of year. Motoman shipped the equipment out to the customer, and he called me the first day of January, whatever the first business day of January was. And he was like, hey, the robot's not working. And I go, yeah, okay. So what happened? And he's like, I don't know. Your guy went home. He goes, let me give you 2 options. You either get somebody here, or you can come pick this thing up on Route 3A. So you're going to have to explain to people that aren't from New Hampshire what Route 3A is.
Yeah.
And I'm like, David, don't throw it out. He's like, no, I mean, first of all, this thing is a monster piece of equipment. He's like, I'm going to park it in the middle of the goddamn highway if you don't come get it.
Oh,
so
boy.
Obviously we jumped through some hoops and got it taken care of.
Got it worked out.
Good. So Who is can you give us a big personality of somebody that you think we should interview within the robot
biggest.
business?
I say the
One of the
biggest.
biggest. I mean, if it's within reason. But yeah.
All right, so I had to puzzle over this a little bit because there may be a possibility that some of these people won't talk to you
Well, yeah.
once they figure out who you are.
That's okay.
To me, there's some really interesting personalities in the market right now. One of which, Chuck Russo runs BACA Systems, BACA,
Mm-hmm.
and Chuck ran RPT. He was one of the biggest water jet cutting integration companies in the country, if not the biggest, and was very successful. He sold the business and then he started BACA up. And all BACA does is stone cutting.
Yep.
And they use the high precision KUKA robots along with some really slick software. And, to me, Chuck is a guy that I've known probably most of my career, first by reputation and then personally. And his story is phenomenal. He is incredibly successful. It would be interesting if you could get him to talk with you, because he would share with you that not a lot of people in the industry are.
That's cool. Yeah. It's funny. I met a guy in Prague when I was abroad here, like right before COVID.
Name dropper. I was in Prague.
No, well, and this is how random it
Go
is.
ahead.
I met this guy and he's like, I just bought a BACA Systems, full system, and I just implemented it. And, he was asking about, if I knew who they were. And I was like, I know of them, but I've never been introduced to Chuck. So, I'll have to tell Chuck that story that, middle of nowhere guy who had never heard of really, he's like, well, I don't really know what you mean by robots, but I just bought a BACA system for my, they sold stone, countertop for somewhere in Texas. So
it's an incredible market. If recollection serves, BACA has become KUKA's biggest non-automotive integrator. They kind of classify them as more of an OEM than an integrator, but they do a really, really nice business. So that's the first guy. And then there's two other guys that I would recommend. One will be a difficult get, and that's Mike Chico. And Mike is president and CEO of FANUC.
Yep.
I think he's a fantastic guy. He's an interesting personality, and he demonstrates a real unique set of skill sets for an organization of that size. Talking with him has always been very interesting, and software engineering place in the business, and grew up. He was a young 20-something-year-old. And then the last guy is a guy I worked with at Motoman, who is now running Plus One, and that's Eric Nieves.
Yeah.
And my recommendation of trying to get an interview with Eric is you will enjoy thoroughly if you get a chance to hear inside of his head.
Cool.
He's an incredible talent.
Good.
He's very smart, and he's doing very well. And those are three guys that, when you have those conversations of who would you like to sit and have a beer with and just talk, that would be an interesting roundtable.
Well, I think that's kind of how we came up with this idea of doing this, was like, well, because of COVID, let's basically have a beer with these guys and have some good conversation and record it and see if other people want to hear it. So
there you go. You have my recommendations.
Thank you, Brian. Those are good recommendations.
Yeah, for sure. The last question that I have for you, really is probably a simple, and I think I already know the answer to it, but who is more frustrating to have work for you, myself or Mr. Savoya?
Well, there's not even a contact.
I'm a saint compared to him, right?
Zach, you are so far beyond anybody else in that organization. But I will tell you that I respected your tenaciousness and very successful what you did. So yeah, you were You were high maintenance, dude.
Somebody might call tenacious, others might just call psychopathic. That's cool. Totally get it.
Well, I mean, listen, we talk about this all the time. This is a business of results, and you got results. So if you weren't as successful as you were, I'd just hang up on you.
Well, I'm glad you didn't. That's for sure.
But you guys both made the UR experience a great one. I mean, you've heard me say this before. I don't regret leaving that organization because I needed to for personal reasons, basically to maintain my health. I mean, I after you reached out to me and wanted to talk about this, I started writing down the names of guys that have died. Guys like Jay Hallberg. You want to talk about a personality in the industry? Jay worked with me at Motoman, and Jay had a stutter, and we used to have great times and laugh. And here's one of the PG stories. We were together at Oktoberfest. Phil Monin took the entire Motoman sales team to Oktoberfest. And one year, because we were successful, and I sat down next to Jay and started poking him every time I finished my beer. And at about noon, he said, "Listen, you poke me one more time, I'm going to punch you in the face." And we both apparently went our separate ways. And then a couple hours later, we got together and I poked him and he punched me right in the teeth. And he's like, "I told you I was going to do that." And I was like, "Oh, man."
Well, I don't blame him because I've certainly had
Hallberg's,
my fair of wrestling matches with you, in which I've always made sure that you knew that I was a younger man in those battles.
I think that you should be ashamed of yourself for picking on the aged.
Well, you tried to tackle me that one time and I just ducked and you flew. You remember that one? You probably don't.
That was on the streets of Copenhagen.
That was on the streets of Copenhagen. Probably 3 a.m.
Yeah.
There are some good photos of that night that are out there.
All right, what else you want to know? Are you done?
I don't ever want to show those photos. But honestly, man, I mean, this was just a great experience to sit down with you and just catch up. I don't know if I have anything else, honestly.
I'm trying to find the picture right now. Zach, from the Christmas party. What was it, 3 years ago? When we were all up on the roof in Miami Beach?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Was that 3 years ago? I think that was 2 years ago.
Oh.
2 years ago. Anyway.
Talking about the one in Disney World? Or...
Hopefully this is useful to you.
No, I think it was awesome.
We really appreciate it. We could talk for a while longer, and I think this is probably not going to be the last conversation that we ask you to have with us, Brian. But we appreciate it very much. I mean, you're kind of giving us our start here, so we appreciate you helping us kick it off.
Yeah, I think both of us wouldn't be here today without you, so we certainly appreciate it.
Definitely. More than you know.
Oh.
And on that note, well, cool, man. I'm gonna.
Hi, boys. Have a Merry Christmas. I hope Brutus is getting just a bucket full of toys.